So, good evening and welcome. We are delighted to be with you tonight as we share some of the findings of Project Violet and help you navigate the findings of this research. The press of a button this morning is the culmination of 3+ years of work, and we so appreciate the support that you have offered to the project and your ongoing support. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Jane Day, a Baptist minister, and I serve the Baptist Union in the role of Centenary Development Enabler.
Good evening, I'm Helen Cameron. I'm a research fellow at the Centre for Baptist Studies at Regent's Park College in Oxford, and Jane and I together have been the co-leaders for Project Violet.
In you joining us and being with us this evening, we are aware that there are some people who are attending who know nothing about Project Violet and others who have been following the journey more closely. So Helen, why don't you tell us what we can expect this evening?
Thank you, Jane. I think there's a PowerPoint slide just on its way. So here's an outline for our webinar this evening. We're going to start by reminding you about the purposes of Project Violet and why the project was needed. Then we're going to introduce the findings to you and help you navigate the website so that you can see the different resources that are there. We're then going to hear from some of the co-researchers who were involved in Project Violet. This evening, we're also going to offer some examples of how several groups across Baptist Together are seeking to discuss the findings. By doing this, we hope it will encourage you to creatively navigate the findings in the context you are in and prepare to discuss them. We'll also offer a worked example of how a local church can engage with the findings. And in closing, we'll explain the next steps. We promise we're going to finish by 8 o'clock.
Thanks, Helen. It sounds a really rich evening ahead of us. We should also say that the chat function is on throughout this evening. So if you do have any questions or comments, feel free to make use of the chat. You will notice there are rather a lot of us on the screen on the call this evening, so we can't promise to answer every question, but we will address what we can in the time that we have. And you're welcome to contact us, and the contact details will be offered at the end of the evening. And I should say, for those who are just joining now, you are very welcome, and we ask that people put themselves on mute to avoid background noise.
So, Jane, where did Project Violet begin? Can you tell us how the story started?
Indeed, Helen. Well, as you know, I was appointed a Centenary Development Enabler for Baptist Together in 2019. And that particular post was created to enable sustained progress in removing barriers towards greater equality in ministry between women and men in Baptist life. And I recognised that within 6 months of being in post, I could listen to women 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and very little would change with regard to these barriers being removed. So I began to wonder about research, and that was when you and I met and began a collaboration. And we know that there have been several phases to the project. Our first phase was something called Mosaic. Tell us about this phase, Helen.
Yes, this first phase of Project Violet invited all women serving as Baptist ministers to write their story in no more than 1,000 words, and in that to capture something of their joys and sorrows in ministry. We had an excellent response and received 50 stories, which equates to 24% of women. These stories formed the bedrock upon which the project has built. The next phase was that we met with all the stakeholders across Baptist life who were able to shape women's experience of ministry.
And this is where it got exciting and where the complexities of Baptist life is seen at its best, as you and I hosted 44 meetings across every aspect of Baptist life, in which we shared what Project Violet is seeking to achieve and invited questions and comment. And I think looking back, that was quite key to the process. One, because we got to understand in more detail some of the challenges which women ministers continue to experience. And two, we also built relationships with so many people. We then moved to doing the research by recruiting co-researchers. So that was our next phase.
To recruit co-researchers, we invited women to take part by researching a question about women's experience of ministry that mattered to them. 16 women stepped forward and undertook that task, working in 4 groups. The first group were in regional or college roles. The second group were millennial leaders. The third group were Black and brown women. And the fourth group were those facing barriers who needed additional flexibility in their ministry. As each group finished their research projects, they met to reflect upon them and to ask what God was saying to them through them. A group of 3 women from our Baptist colleges also met and asked the same question about the research. Then the 2 groups met together and engaged in further theological reflection. There was also a point in the project where we wanted to engage with ecumenical colleagues.
Yes, that was an interesting dimension to the project. Last November, we held a workshop with 12 women from 6 different traditions as they identified the gifts and the challenges of being a woman and a minister in their tradition. The Baptist women who participated in that event also joined us for our 24-hour conference with the co-researchers 2 weeks ago. So for the first time, we got all the women researchers together physically and looked at the findings of the project and agreed the requests for change that we are putting to the Baptist community. So that's the story, just in a few minutes and a little about the process. And here we are this evening, eager to hear about the findings. But before we do that, we also know, Helen, that there have been ongoing initiatives during the last 3 years. So up until this point, how have people been engaging with Project Violet?
I think it would be a good idea if we shared the website, because that's the main vehicle that we've used for sharing resources. So over the last 3 years, we've held online seminars, and the recordings of each of those are still on the events tab of the website. So you can see them there scrolling down, and you're very welcome to go back and listen to any of them. Going back up a level. The other resource that's been used very widely is a film which Jane made with Helen Pankhurst about the social context within which we address sexism. We know a number of churches and colleges have used the film and used the discussion guide, which is also available on the website. For example, New North Road Baptist Church in Huddersfield met on International Women's Day and watched the film and had a discussion about it using the discussion guide. And then a further resource on the website are that back in February, we released our first season of podcasts. They introduced the history of women in Baptist life, and then also introduced some of the language which is used to discuss sexism. And I understand that there have now been over 1,600 episode listens to that first season of the podcast. Today, we've launched the second season of our podcast, which are interviews with each of our co-researchers.
Thanks, Helen. So all those resources are on the website, and do feel free to use them in your context as you see fit and share widely. So that kind of brings us up to speed of where we are, and obviously our reason for being here tonight is, of course, to hear some of the findings. So let's introduce the findings to you.
The best way to navigate the findings is if we look more closely at the website, you'll see that the landing page takes you to a first tile which says Project Violet Findings, and that having clicked on that tile, you'll see that there are 7 tiles. And we're going to show you the contents of each of those and explain how they relate to the findings. We'll start with the first tile, which is called Project Findings and Overview. And in this tile, there are two documents. The first gives an overview of the findings and our vision for change. So anyone who wants to get to grips quickly with what the project has done and an overview of its findings can be done through this document. This document contains our vision for the findings, and I'll just share what that is. It's in three parts. Firstly, that women will flourish in ministry from the point at which they first recognise a call through to retirement. Secondly, that whatever type of ministry women find themselves in, they will be supported and valued by the Baptist community. And thirdly, that all stakeholders in the Baptist community will be willing to change the ways in which they work to ensure more just outcomes for women ministers. Now, in this tile, you're also going to find a report for local churches that brings together the findings that are most relevant to the local church. So that's a single downloadable document for people in local churches to use, and we'll come back to that later. Let's move on to the next tile, which is the co-researcher reports. In this tile, you're going to find 15 reports. We had 16 co-researchers, but one report was co-authored. And these are the research conducted by our co-researchers. The reports vary in their format according to the audience really that the co-researcher was addressing. So for example, one of our co-researchers, Carol Bostridge, researched the relationship between marital status and ministry. So if you want to know more about Carol's research and her findings, you click on the link to read her report. Also within this tile towards the bottom, you'll find the report from the ecumenical meeting that we mentioned earlier, which was called Receptive Space. So that report is also in that tile. Now, when you see the website, you'll see that there are interviews with our co-researchers, and we've decided that it would be helpful to listen to brief extracts from 3 of those interviews now, just to give you a flavour of the research and the people who got involved in doing that. So we'll share the PowerPoint and we'll listen in turn to 3 extracts. The first one is from co-researcher Beth Powney.
Along with Jane Day, I had been running a program which we called Magnify You, which was an intentional piece of work to develop ministers, female ministers who we felt perhaps had greater potential to go on to larger roles of some sort or other. And we had, I think it started as 15 women on this program and it dropped to about 13 or 14, as these things do. And this ran over 2 years, from 2020 to 2022. And we met every other month, mostly on Zoom because of that time frame. And I realized as this was coming to a conclusion, as partway through probably when Project Violet began to be birthed, that it was having a huge impact on these women in a way that was incredibly exciting. But also I couldn't quite grasp why, because what we were doing felt so simple and so straightforward. And so the piece of research I picked up on was looking at what was the impact of this intentional leadership development and how does that sit with our Baptist ecclesiology when we don't do that very easily or comfortably. So that was the question I entered into the Project Violet research team with.
And now we're going to hear from a co-researcher in the 4th group, Denise Dobby.
So my chosen topic was about ministering through the menopause. I think it was important to me because as a GP, I saw and consulted with and listened to many women who were going through the menopause and facing many challenges in all areas of their life, particularly in their working life, and working together with them, weighing up all the confusing evidence for different treatments and management and what would work for them. To enable them to be able to reach their full potential and manage the challenges and flourish at that stage of life, and navigating workplace policies and all of that thing. And I got to reading around what was available with the rise of Davina McCall and her programme on the menopause. It's become a topic that we talk about a lot more. And and over my time in medicine, there's been varying, HRT's been in favour and out of favour and all of that. So weighing that up, and so really journeying alongside women in that point and helping them not to be lost to the workforce, because we lose so many really able women sometimes without support. And then in church life, this became something that women in ministry were talking about too. And I was approached by another a woman minister who said, would I, with my GP hat, my bivocational hat, be willing to co-facilitate some Facebook drop-in sessions, some Zoom calls, really, just talk about the issues that women in ministry face as they minister through this stage of life. And then I have a vested interest because I am a menopausal woman ministering through the menopause. So it's important to me on all of those counts, really. And I think I really wanted to explore both the challenges of ministering through a menopause and also the gifts that ministering at this stage of life brings, because God knows us and he calls us, knowing us and knowing what stage of life we're at.
And then finally, we're going to listen to Pam Searle, who was in our third group of co-researchers.
Yes, so my research looked at the decline in women ministers within ministry, Baptist ministry specifically. And I think it really struck me that having got close to coming out of ministry myself, I felt, you always seem to think, I don't know, you know, you may have experienced this, but that when you're going through a hardship, that it's only you that's going through that, and it's very personal. But once I began to feel a bit stronger and started to talk to one or two other ladies, women ministers, that is, I started to realise that actually it wasn't just me with these troubling experiences, and these weren't isolated incidences. And so I felt the nudge to sort of delve a bit deeper. And the deeper I went, I realised that actually that the pain that I suffered in ministry, and the pain that a number of women who have suffered and come out of ministry, it wasn't stopping. And they were left quite badly scarred. And so I wanted to see if there's something that I could do to encourage women ministers and to perhaps even excite some women who are perhaps looking at ministry. And then, you know, Project Violet seemed to emerge. It seemed as if it was all a big answer to prayer. That, you know, here am I sort of considering why this happened to me, hearing what's happened to other women as well, and then hearing from Jane about Project Violet. It was so exciting, and it's great to see God at hand.
Mm. So those are just three of our co-researchers who have shared something of the topic that they chose to research. As I've already said, theological reflection was an important part of Project Violet, and so there's a tile which contains our 4 theological reflection reports, which summarise the theological themes that arose from each group of co-researchers in conversation, prayer and reflection with each other. Let's hear now from Helen Dare, who was one of our theological reflection team, about her involvement.
Yeah, so I've been part of the team of theological reflectors. There have been 3 of us, so myself, my colleague Rosa Hunt, who is one of the co-principals at Cardiff Baptist College, but she also is in ministry as well. She's a minister of Tabernacle Welsh Baptist Church in Cardiff, and Clara Rushbrook, co-principal in Northern Baptist College. So that's been our role. We've met together. We have read reports and discussed and discerned. It's been a real privilege to work with each other, actually. And we've done research, this theological reflecting. It's a very new way of doing academic theology for me, because we've not been trying to tease out arguments. We've not been analysing in the same way that we normally would, and certainly that I'm familiar with from biblical studies. We've read these reports, the co-researcher reports, very prayerfully. We've done that as individuals, and then we've come together as theological reflectors and listened to each other. And I think one of the things that has struck me in that process is sometimes the way that things have struck me, and then they have clearly resonated with other women who are in different contexts to me. And we have found ourselves experiencing something very special together, I think, as we've looked at these reports. So we've met together online mostly, and then we have met, we've sort of drawn out themes from what we've read. There was a process that we went through to do that. And then we've met online with the co-researchers. And again, those resonances and the things that have come through have been very striking to us.
So you've heard from 3 of our co-researchers and from Helen Dare, one of our theological reflectors. And all we've done so far is introduced all the research that has been done over the last 3 years. And you may be thinking, gosh, there's a lot to read. And the honest answer to that is yes, there is. But we have recorded an interview with each co-researcher, and our BSL speaking researcher has made a film. And these are designed to inspire you to read all the work that has been done. A lot of issues have been uncovered and a lot of painful experiences have been shared. And so it just isn't possible to sum that up in a few takeaway points. And of course, one woman can't speak for all women. And so it's important to engage with the different perspectives and ideas that you'll find in the research. So now we want to go back to the website and move on and introduce the findings, which we're calling requests for change. And you'll see that the top tile on the first line is entitled requests for change. If you click on that tile and you can see as it's on the screen, you'll find that there are documents for each of the requests for change. They're a single side of A4 that spells out what the request is. And these requests were discerned at the Conference of Co-Researchers, which you saw earlier. And as a conference, we agreed those requests for change. So in that tile, you're going to find 57 documents.
57 documents. Okay. Did I hear that correctly, Helen?
Yeah, you most certainly did.
Wow, so that's 57 requests for change. Will not some people on this screen this evening be a bit daunted by that, or think that actually we're asking quite a lot from the Baptist Union with 57 requests for change?
Well, I guess you could say that after 105 years of women in ministry, the Project Violet researchers think it's fair to ask for change. And also, I think we want to commend the Baptist Union for being courageous enough to take women's ministry seriously and want to engage with the issues that we've uncovered in the research. And it's important to note that the requests for change are not all aimed at one group of people or one person. So, for example, there are things for colleges to engage with, things for local churches, associations and specialist teams, and every other part of Baptist life. There are also things that individual ministers can do and make their own commitments to the findings. So no one person's being asked to address all 57, just to reassure you. So to leave the website for a moment, we said that we were going to share this evening some of the things that people are doing and might do now before we submit our final report to Baptist Council on the 23rd of October. So would you like to tell us about those, Jane?
Yeah, thanks, Helen. We do know that many people, and many of you are on the screen this evening, who have been in touch with us already, and you've told us what you're doing to engage with the findings. For example, I know that one of our co-researchers is planning to meet with all the retired Baptist ministers in their area to reflect on the findings and to engage prayerfully. I know that we've got a number of retired Baptist ministers on our call this evening. So if you do get an invite to that gathering, do go along. And equally, if you want to arrange a gathering in your association, then do. A number of regional ministers have set time aside on their trustees' agendas to reflect on all the material, and in some cases have set aside an entire day over the summer where they can gather and meet and talk and pray together. All of our Baptist colleges, if you don't know, they have a 24-hour conference every September. And this September, the whole of the conference will be hosted at Regent's Park College in Oxford, and tutors and lecturers from across all our Baptist colleges will meet to discern and discuss the findings. There are events for ministers, clusters, small groups and association gatherings across the country. One of our co-researchers is from Scotland, so Laura is engaging with the Baptist Union of Scotland about their possible engagement. So I think that kind of what this does, Helen, it just gives us a snapshot that all parts of Baptist life are engaging with the findings. And again, for those who are on the screen this evening, I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to ask your association, college, ministers' meetings what they have got planned in terms of their response to the findings. We've also made reference to local churches responding, and again, we've got many on the screen this evening. So let's look at an example of what this means in practice for a local church.
So we said we'd return to the requests for change for local churches, and we're going to share what those are on the PowerPoint, and I'm just going to talk us through those. So there are 7 requests directed specifically at local churches. The first is to make opportunities to listen to new voices. Women are not all the same, and so it's important that a variety of women's voices are heard in church life. The next request is that local churches make their position on women's ministry known prior to settlement, in other words, when they're looking for a new minister. Women ministers can find it difficult to know which churches would welcome their ministry when they're applying to be a minister, and so it's always helpful when the position is clear. The third request is around role models. It was striking how many women started their own journey towards ministry when they saw a woman preaching for the first time. Seeing women ministers as role models does help other women hear the call of God. The next one is about the church meeting, a really important context for those ministering in local churches. We want encourage people to take a course that's being developed on developing slow wisdom in the local church meeting. So local churches are being invited to reflect upon the way in which they conduct their church meetings so that they focus on discerning the mind of Christ. The next request is about taking up training in advocacy. Challenging unhelpful language and behaviour as it happens stops patterns of sexism developing. Training will be developed and then offered to ministers and others wanting to increase their confidence in doing this. The next one is about a theology of disability that enables local churches to reflect upon their practice. We're calling for some national theological reflection to be commissioned and then offered to local churches so they can reflect on what they believe about disability And that can help them think about how they wish to welcome and include people with a disability in the life of the church. And then the final request is that local churches use resources that reflect the diversity of Baptist life. We want to ensure that the resources we use, such as posters, PowerPoints, newsletters, reflect the diversity of the people who are involved in Baptist life. So that's a summary of the 7 requests for change that we're putting to local churches. And we would encourage local churches to discuss these requests in their church meetings and to discern where they might be able to commit to action.
You made reference there, Helen, to the commit to action. And again, it's appropriate that we share the next steps here as we encourage all parts of Baptist life to make their response to the findings. So if we go back to the website, we hope that when the different groups in Baptist life have discussed the findings and discerned what God is asking and inviting them to do, that they will commit to action by filling in the template that you will find on the how to respond tile. You will see there that there is a template for any stakeholder to use, but in particular to help people, there are ready-made templates for local churches, associations and colleges. So they're all there on the website. We're also inviting 2 requests for change, which invite a commitment from individual ministers. Again, you will see in the request for change tile a link to an online board where you can make a public commitment if this is what you are ready to do. So here we see people responding already to those commitment to actions. So our invitation, once all this has been digested and discerned and discussed, is to encourage all completed commitments to action and the responses to be made by the 30th of September 2024. And those forms can be emailed to projectviolet@baptist.org.uk. We'll put that in the chat later. And then the idea is, Helen, as we know, that these responses will form the final report, and the report will be discussed with the Baptist Union of Council in October 2024, later this year. And already some people are saying, yeah, but what's after council in October 2024? So we will revisit the responses at the October 2025 council meeting for accountability purposes and to see how we are all engaging with the findings. So that's the story of Project Violet to date, a 3-year research project where we are now handing the baton over to you to make your response to the 57 requests for change. But Helen, before we end this part of the evening, I want to ask you, what's your greatest hope now that we've reached this point?
Thanks, Jane. I think my hope is that people will take the time to grasp all that's being offered here. There is no simple switch we can turn on that will address the injustices that have been uncovered. I'm sure if there was, somebody would have found it a long time ago, and there would have been no need for this extensive and detailed research. So I'm hoping that people will find the patience to think about these 3 things. First of all, the everyday language and behaviour that we use in church life. Secondly, the accepted ways we have of doing things. And then thirdly, what we believe about the church and the role of ministers within it. So you've asked me the question, Jane, can I put that same question back to you? What do you now hope for?
Yeah, thanks, Helen. Well, my deepest hope and prayer is that all parts of Baptist life make space in their gatherings to talk about the request for change and say yes. One of my favourite stories in the Bible is when the angel appeared to Mary in the Magnificat. And I often wonder how long it took for Mary to say her yes to God's invitation. I think the whole world waited with bated breath, but I want all of us to say yes. This whole project, as we know, has been birthed in prayer, laughter, tears, pain, hope, and hours of dedication from so many women. And I really hope that we'll say a big yes and commit to action. And in saying yes, I have no doubt whatsoever that the Spirit will do what she needs to do and move amongst us. And I also have another hope, which is that the offering of Project Violet, I hope, will lead to more faith, more hope, and more love across Baptists together.